we are not probably addressing it well, but the index will help us to have this discussion, is to define poverty in different dimensions, to define cutoffs, and to define it through the lens of the poverty economist view. For example, what is the appropriate cutoff for education? What is the educational poverty? We can define it in a normative way. We can use laws, but we also can approach it as economists. We can see what level of education gets you lifetime earnings that will put your family below the poverty line. And that would be a fine approach to actually take multidimensionality to a core set of measures in poverty. We can do the same with health, right? We can also try to think what kind of complementarity exists between the private spending and the public spending. What is the minimum of public spending that has to accompany private spending of individuals so that they can achieve certain health and education standards, right? So these are the things where we can probably expand our traditional core poverty measures. Because the way how we implement our poverty measurement now is that it is exclusively nutritionally focused. Right? So when somebody will tell me how we actually calibrate, how we anchor our poverty line, we take nutrition. That's it. That's the only thing. Why only nutrition? If we take multidimensionality of poverty in a serious way, it has to be also other observable achievements that we can use to calibrate the poverty lines in the material space. On targeting, unlike Rinku, I think here I see a lot of potential gains in following this route in places where there is a big debate on targeting. At the same time, there are risks in applying, in following this methodology everywhere. And the reason why I'm saying that is that a lot of effort on targeting was to identify the income poor. And the big apparatus that was developed was trying to basically get the proxy means test to measure what we don't observe and to measure that indirectly. So we have some tools that help us doing that. What the multidimensional poverty approach does is that it says, we don't have to worry about it because we can observe everything directly, right? The question becomes how we weight those different observable characteristics so that we can differentiate between the poor and the non-poor. These are not necessarily substitutes. These are the things that can be actually combined, as the example of Mexico shows. But unfortunately, in some weak institutional settings, the appeal of the new index will be to displace or to contradict the work, the attempt to try to get good measurement of income poor. And this is where I see some risk, because a lot of what cash transfers programs try to do is that they supply people with cash when they don't have it. The only thing that you need to be non-poor in certain circumstances is to have income. And the income transfer programs to be effective and to actually work as they're supposed to work, most naturally need to have an income measure for identifying the poor. So that is one area where I think the application of multidimensional poverty index might create some confusion. But as rightly put out here, there are a lot of social programs that target not only income, but target many different aspects of well-being. And the use of such composite indices may be actually a very welcome change for them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Very useful, Ruslan. And last but not least, Nobuo.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. After I saw this press release of UNDP's MPI, I was very fascinated, and I have been studying quite a bit of this methodology. And definitely, my final question, ultimate question, is simple. What can we do as an advisor for government? Usually we are poverty economists, and usually we work for at least one or two or even more countries. and we need to give them advice. Okay, your indicator is not good, so you need to improve this way or that way. And consumption poverty, there are ambiguities. We should admit there are some arbitrariness, but we know more or less direction, what direction we should go. So if depending on government data availability, usually we can make some, I believe, useful recommendations to government. However, when I started studying this one, I talked to Samuel and I remember what happened in India. And I became very pessimistic because just relying on government decision or judgment, there is a possibility they may create very bad MPIs. And the sad thing is that we don't know actually they are creating bad one or a good one. At least we can say their indicators are not correlated well with consumption poverty. But whoever doesn't believe consumption poverty, that doesn't mean anything. So, at the end of the day, how can we find better MPI without telling, correlation with consumption poverty? And actually, whenever correlation with consumption poverty is low, that's the part MPI becomes extremely important. For example, before coming here, I quickly checked, correlation between GDP per capita and poverty headcount rate based on your, PPP $1 to 25 poverty line and MPI. And if we include all countries, we didn't have entire 104 countries, but if we include, whatever countries available in our database, around 98 countries, correlation was quite high. GDP per capita and MPI was around 86%, minus 86%, and MPI and $25 poverty line is 87%. So in a sense, whatever measure you use, more or less you can say which country is poor and which country is not poor. You don't have to worry so much. However, if we look at poorest 20% country, then we found hugely different correlation, much lower correlation. For example, GDP per capita and MPI is just minus 50%, originally 86%. And MPI and US $1.25 poverty line, this number becomes 34%. The number declined dramatically. But this is a place, MPI may be extremely useful information for the government. So basically, consumption is not necessarily good measure. There are certain aspects your country is doing quite well, but other aspects your country is not doing well. So this difference becomes extremely important. But again, we need to know our or whatever their MPIs are good measure or not. Then, Martin Lavarian also said, and a lot of people say, okay, what does MPI represent? At the end of the day, we have some concept that MPI represents something. If MPI is completely nothing to do with your impression or your perception of poverty, then people may think, this is same as GDP per capita in Japan. That's exactly what I said before. That's not useful for policymakers. Then this indicator sooner or later disappear, or people need to think about new measure. So somehow this MPI need to represent something. What is that? And today, what I learned, this word normative. So basically, somehow, policymakers have some policy goals, like 5 years plan in South Asian countries. So to achieve that, maybe this way of weighting and selection variables is useful to achieve this goal. Then this MPI becomes extremely useful indicator to check, progress of your achievement. But at the same time, that may not be necessarily correlate with your perception or people's perception. So, for example, Samuel said, they ask each person, what do you think? What number, what indicator is important? What dimension is important? So-called maybe stated preference, survey of stated preference. Basically, ask everyone, what is your preference? But again, this is also my first comment, if you want to know exactly what weights need to be allocated, at the end of the day, relative weight becomes important. This means you need to know not just poverty. You need to know nutrition and importance of education, health. You need to know everything. So do you think asking one person, particularly in Bangladesh or South Asian country, many of them are even illiterate. asking them what weights are reasonable. Sometimes this is too much to ask. Then next thing, I read Mariana's paper, and there is another approach, so-called revealed preference approach. This case, left-hand side variable is basically a subjective judgment of poverty. Can be happiness, but poverty. The right-hand side with a bunch of indicators. The random regression, you will find a significant coefficient in the right-hand side. So maybe we can use this information to decide what variables are highly correlated with general public's average feeling or perception of poverty. So that's one way to go. So I thought, by reading her paper or Nana Kakwani's paper, maybe we may find some objective way to find what coefficient should be allocated. And as long as we use subject judgment in left-hand side, then we know what we are measuring. We are measuring people's perception of poverty. Could be multidimensional, could be one-dimensional, but everything is determined by data, not our perception, not a so-called expert decision. So that's one way to go. But at the same time, I know this kind of data, and particularly most variables are dummies. So correlation is should be very, very limited. So we cannot ignore consensus building process and other important process. So in PREM network, what we are doing is one data set, Indonesia's data set, including subjective judgment of poverty, but also so many different variables, nutrition and consumption and health, education, so many bunch of variables. So there is a possibility we can experiment, how these are correlated. Then based on that, we can have some, a kind of direction of, what weights can be allocated. But in any case, I think when we start from consumption poverty, or a lot of poverty economists are very familiar with consumption poverty concept and theory. And for us, maybe most important and most tricky part of MPI is, okay, what MPI is representing? And in other words, how this weights and selection variable meaning, basically if you put weight equals 0, mean you are not selecting. So in general, this is weights, selection weights. So how, what kind of weights are, reasonable, and if you become an advisor for the government, how to recommend, what kind of recommendation we can make. If this becomes clear, maybe we can be a good advisor for the government. That's I thought. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, no. Very good. Thank you very much, Nobu. Okay, so what do we do? So let's, what we'll do is the following. Maybe we're going to entertain a few questions from the audience, hopefully just a few. And then, and Luis was going to be the first, but it's going to be a short intervention, right? Just hold on a second. And then after a few questions, then we'll go back to you guys, to Sabine, Mariama, Gonzalo, Jim, and whoever of the panelists wants to make a final quick intervention, and then we'll close with you, Pete. Is that fine? Okay, so just a few burning thoughts. So, Luis.
Okay, well, I had a couple thoughts that might be of interest. First of all, as several people have said, the idea of multidimensional indices is not new. And there are two famous ones that the World Bank is known for. One is Doing Business and one is the CPIA. And you guys might find it interesting to learn a bit from the experience of that. I'm not going to bother you with the CPIA. Jenny can tell you all. No,
please.
Jenny
No,
can
please.
tell you all about the CPIA. But I was recently in Rwanda and doing businesses among an index which I think most everybody knows about, and there are a number of criticisms of it. But anyway, I was recently in Rwanda, and the director of economic planning in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development said to me, we don't know what to do. We are the top performer in Africa. We're now rated number 7 in the world. But this didn't trickle down at all. And I controlled myself, and I didn't look at him and go, duh, you know, but of course it doesn't. And so the real question, and